right. So I just also sent a message about recording, but just letting you all know that's why you're getting a recording alert now because we were not recording the activity when everyone was out of the room. So let's talk about whether we should address the election with our students. All right. So we want to start by pointing out that we can all acknowledge the event, even if we don't spend a bunch of time on it in class. Let's keep in mind that our students are full people with intersectional identities that they can't put away or leave outside the classroom. And so, while some folks may feel like they are in a position to sort of leave politics behind, leave it at the door, or our academy as a larger institution tends to encourage a sort of split between who you are in class and who you are outside of class for both students and instructors. But that is a rather privileged thing to be able to do. Your race, your gender, your class, whatever they all come with you into class. And so you keep having experiences around it. So that's why it can be really important to just acknowledge what students are dealing with. Everyone can offer empathy to students in different ways, such as listening during office hours. So maybe you don't spend much time acknowledging the election in class, but you do offer students the space outside of class in case they want to talk to you about it or how it's impacting them in their work. And finally, this is an example of a student experience that calls for empathy and flexibility. But of course, we should be empathetic and flexible at every point in the semester. Kind of like how Mary Catherine said, discussion skills are necessary not just for political conversations. We should be practicing flexibility and empathy with students, no matter what's going on in the world or what point of the semester it is, because people are going to have emergencies. They're going to deal with all kinds of things. The election may not be the big thing that really impacts their semester more than something else. They could be dealing with all kinds of other types of oppression or trauma or whatever it might be. So we should always practice these sorts of approaches. So what we want to prompt you to think about is how this discussion might be connected to your class and what goals you have for it. So some instructors may decide to engage in more depth depending on the topic and the goals of your course. So we've got some prompt questions here, which are also included on the handout PDF that we've shared in the chat. But asking basically, how is the topic you're going to talk about or topics from the election connected with the course? Or what do you want to accomplish by bringing this up with students? Have you already talked about politics or built skill around those discussions with your students? Are students wanting to talk about the election? So you might ask your students what bandwidth they have if they even want to talk about it. An example would be I teach sociology, so my students are already talking about the elections in many ways. Okay. Um, yeah, so we do have on the handout, we have some examples of how you might plan your course differently depending on how you answer these questions. So we have a computer science example, and then we have a sociology example. And I'm going to put that resource in the chat again for us. And while I do that, we're going to ask you to do a personal reflection here. And our question is, what would your goal be for a student discussion or activity about the upcoming election? And this is just going to be different for every class and whatever you're teaching. So this is just something for you all to think about. And let's give you just a minute to reflect on that. And feel free to use the handout if you'd like to type in it or write something down on paper about your thoughts. And I've shared both a Word and PDF document version of that for you all. All right. So let's then think, keeping your answer in mind, how we might facilitate election discussions and activities. And I will pass it to Mary Catherine here. Oh, no, not Mary Catherine. Never mind. It's still me. Sorry. All right. Oh, yes, this is me. Okay. So this is sort of like a broader framework that we talk about with having these discussions with students, which is emphasizing curiosity, exploration, understanding, listening, dialogue, reflection, evidence, and respect. And students might think, oh, I have to say the right thing to get an A from the teacher. They want me to say I agree with this or that perspective, and then I will get a good grade or good participation for the class. We want to move students away from that mindset and into just exploring through their disciplinary lens that they are developing in the class. So offer students multiple discipline-based perspectives on the same issue. They don't have to pick the right one. One doesn't have to be a winner. It's just that we want them to understand the different perspectives. Promote listening and understanding over resolution or winning. Provide space for students to connect course materials to their own lives and validate that knowledge and experience. Recognize collegial dialogue as a disciplinary skill and scholarly practice that needs to be taught. So you're not just asking students to talk about these topics in class, but you are asking them to practice the disciplinary skill of listening, of dialogue, of respectful interactions as part of their performance for the class, as part of how they earn their grade for the class. So it's not just, say the opinion I like, it's use disciplinary tools to support what you are sharing and allow students to contribute to the degree they're able. So we don't know what students are bringing with them. They may not have the bandwidth to participate so much in a big discussion, but maybe we can give them options like allow an individual or paired activity. It's up to them to pick how they're going to engage because we don't want to push students so far if they're already dealing with a lot. Now we've got some strategies here for before the discussion. And so one is to co-create community guidelines. So if you've never done this with your students before, you take time to create norms that students will follow together, especially with discussions or when talking about tenser topics. And you can demonstrate your commitment to upholding those guidelines by, for example, bringing them back, having students look at them or update them before having a conversation. Connect the material to your students' lives, communities, and interests if you can to help them build that trust and personal connection to the course. And call in students who make hurtful remarks. So we have a lot of resources just about calling in. If you'd like to learn more about that, we can share more. But a basic overview would be rather than calling students out, calling out, which is often, putting someone on a spotlight for not doing what they're supposed to, right? Instead, sort of offering people a more thoughtful or sensitive way to phrase what they said and offer them that opportunity to correct themselves. And then, of course, break down and practice the discussion skills they're supposed to be practicing. So we can't just expect them to do discussions well, right? Like Mary Catherine said, we have to build the skill with them and practice it. So check that students understand the course material, practice guided critiques of those materials, and then support students in building their own arguments using different disciplinary tools.
Take from here, building on everything that Shed just shared. So those practices that we can be doing throughout the semester to lead up to maybe a more advanced, difficult discussion. We get to that point where we want to have that discussion with our students. How should students prepare for the discussion? So in addition to sort of building those skills iteratively over the course of the semester, we also want to give them really specific guidance on how to prepare for each discussion as you're having it. So some ways that you might expect students to prepare, for example, in the homework leading up to that class might be, for example, identifying particular aspects of the election, interpreting politicians or scholars' stances, assessing the impact of certain issues on various communities. These are the things you want students to come into the discussion having done, and you want to make those really transparent to the students in advance. And then also communicate what they should be doing during or what they should have accomplished by the end of the discussion. Maybe they should be interpreting societal impacts of political rhetoric. Maybe they should be analyzing implications of election materials, evaluating politicians' arguments, developing their own stances based on the evidence they've been gathering and learning about. Sorry about the barking. Structure the discussion so that students know how they should participate. We're going to share, there's some ideas for structure on the handout, but we'll talk about those in a second as well. But generally, remember whatever expectations you have to communicate those openly. Our students don't have the same years of experience that we do participating in scholarly discussions. So being clear about that, those expectations and reiterating them is always a good practice to have. Yes, dogs support respectful. I don't know if dogs are a good example of respectful time. Um, we have this nice quote from one of our student partners, Reba Matthews. She's a senior this year, I believe. Um, Professors should consciously think about how events and topics affect students' personal lives. One way to explore is to not force students to talk about such issues in a purely academic way. Assignments should be nuanced and challenging. So this kind of gets at that balance that Chet and I have been trying to get at with we want assignments to be challenging. We want them to be nuanced. We want them to have a level of intellectual rigor that we hold students to. But at the same time, the discussions, especially about politics, are not able to be totally divided from our students' lives because they do have other personal things going on, and the um, politics around the world, national politics in particular, as they are living in the U.S., affect their lives in very personal ways. And potentially very dangerous ways. So we want to encourage that rigor while still allowing students to engage in a way that works for them based on what else is going on in their lives. So some potential activities. I'll just mention a couple here. Again, the list is on your handout, and we'll share the slides after as well. We're happy to go into more detail if you ever want to speak with us outside of workshops as well. But there's opportunities for anonymous commentary from students through something like Mentimeter, which we did earlier, through a poll, or a write and toss, where you write an idea on a piece of paper, toss it into the middle of the room, and draw some at random to discuss. You can have students engage more in a way that identifies who they are, but doesn't require a lot of verbal commentary. For example, maybe you have them gather and distribute resources on a particular subject, place themselves on a spectrum of some political ideology. And finally, requiring their commentary more actively involved, like writing a reflection. Maybe if they don't want to, if you don't want to have a full discussion yet, writing a reflection is a great way to gauge where your students are at. Creating a mind map where they connect different ideas, different materials they've learned in the semester so far, or sharing evidence-based stances out loud and responding to each other. All of these are different ways that you can get students engaged around politics in a structured way where they know the expectations for how they're supposed to engage and what kind of materials they're supposed to draw on. Then as you're moderating the discussion, whatever format it takes, some things to think about are warming students up, giving them time to review class notes and homework. They're coming from lots of other places during the day, and maybe you haven't thought about your class's materials for a day or two, sometimes even longer if it only meets once a week. And also start thinking about having smaller questions to build up confidence in collegiality. You can do that over the arc of the semester, but even over the arc of a single class session, get them warmed up to talk with each other and talk about these issues. Sort of like we did at the beginning of the session. You can also, you should also think about intervening during tense moments. In political discussions, students might say something that ranges from insensitive microaggression to overt aggressive comment, and that will really put a halt on learning, and it can break a lot of trust. So you want to pause the class if that happens, acknowledge what happened and why it was harmful, call that student in, invite them to make some corrections, make amends, potentially speak with them privately if it feels like in front of the whole class is not the place to do it, and decide whether to return after a moment, maybe dismiss the class, maybe offer the option to leave, depending on how troublesome that was. If students are really traumatized and triggered, they're not going to be able to learn. and potentially dismissing the class and having them write a reflection or something like that to replace the rest of the class can be an alternative that's effective. And then follow up with students if that kind of tense moment does happen. Follow up with them outside of class or in the next class, again, depending on the severity of the moment and what sort of needs to be done to recuperate that trust. And finally, some tips. Remember, you don't need to be an expert in US politics to hold these discussions. It's about facilitation skills more than anything else, and providing students and yourself with the materials that are relevant to your discipline, your course, that they can engage. They don't need to be talking about every aspect of the election in every class, but how is it relevant to your course? Honor their lived experiences. Politics are personal. Personal is political, as we learned in the 70s, I think. And I think Shed, our gender studies person, honor lived experiences. We cannot separate personal experiences from the politics that are happening, and trying to do so can cause a lot of harm. So acknowledging that some of these conversations will be traumatic for some people, how can we mitigate that and make this a space where people know what to expect from the conversation, know how to prepare, and can opt out if they need to. Rely on empathy for ourselves and our students. Incorporate a lot of reflection. Again, in that handout, we have a list of reflection questions that you can use after any discussion, but especially after potentially tense or difficult discussions. And finally, as always, reach out to us if you'd like some one-on-one support. I'm going to stop sharing here, and we do have time for some questions if any of you would like to ask, or stick around for a minute if you like. Thank you so much for being here.